welcome so much to our session this afternoon. My name is Cynthia Totten. And first, I just want to thank TASA for providing this space. I think it's so important to have space to talk about incarcerated survivors and how we can get, the services to them that they need, especially in the midst of some of the current challenges that you all are seeing in Texas. Can we go to the next slide? That's okay. So just to quickly go over the workshop objectives, and before I go into the objectives, I think I'll just kind of give a little bit of an overview of kind of what brings us here. So here we are, it's 2022. We're 10 years out from the adoption of the standards, right? 10 years since then Attorney General Eric Holder signed the Prison Rape Elimination Act standards, into sort of formal existence. And since that time, so much good stuff has happened. So many partnerships have been built up between survivor services organizations and corrections entities to help incarcerated survivors get the access to healing services that they need, whether they were exposed to sexual abuse either during their incarceration or at some other time, in their life journey. And a lot of encouraging things have happened along the way. We had the VOCA rule change, the Victims of Crime Act rule change that took place in 2016 that sort of cleared the way for survivors who are incarcerated to be able to receive services using that type of funding, VOCA funding, and sort of removed that prior prohibition that had been in place on using VOCA funds to serve incarcerated survivors. And meanwhile, again, just lots of good progress. Organizations like, obviously your state coalition built up an entire program around serving incarcerated survivors and programs around the state. I've got two examples with me today, I think, of two organizations, two victim services programs that have really led the way. Who have done quite a lot of work in the past decade to serve incarcerated survivors. And yet at the same time, there have been some challenging pieces, right? We had the COVID pandemic that still is not over, that has had quite an impact on so many aspects of our lives. And certainly when you think about just sort of lack of resources, short staffing, people being pulled in many different directions, and the ways in which that has impacted both the victim services world and the corrections world to the detriment of incarcerated survivors, for sure. And then at the same time, we've seen that there have been some funding shifts as well. And I'm not an expert on all that has been happening in Texas around some of these funding shifts, but we certainly have seen that there have been some changes in the ways that Victims of Crime Act funding and Violence Against Women Act funding are able to be used, that state level dispersed funding in Texas, and the ways in which there now seem to be some restrictions on using those funds for incarcerated survivors. So those are some of the things that we want to pull apart today. That in the midst of those challenges, how do we keep moving forward with the work? How do we keep ensuring that incarcerated survivors have access to services? How do we keep ensuring or build better and more meaningful partnerships? We know that even under the best circumstances, even when there is funding, even when you're not dealing with COVID, there certainly have been a lot of challenges for local programs in Texas around just making sure that MOUs are in place, memoranda of understanding, and that when those memoranda of understanding are in place, that they're meaningfully implemented and followed. and what that means for getting access to services. So that brings us to our workshop objectives. We're going to look at, attaining better outcomes in corrections partnerships, including by engaging with the PREA audit process, PREA being the Prison Rape Elimination Act audit process as a means of strengthening survivor access to services. We're going to look at how to apply successful approaches for program sustainability, including maintaining strong partnerships once services are in place, and gain familiarity with models from around the country for funding services for incarcerated survivors. Next slide, please. So just very quickly about me, and then I'm going to ask Ali and Nisa to introduce themselves. I come from Just Detention International, and we are a national and international organization. We do a lot of technical assistance provision, and I would say that that's largely what brings me here today. I've gotten to work with Ali and Nisa and some of their colleagues at their programs and people at other programs around the state, as well as various colleagues at TASA, at the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault over the years, to try to strengthen access to services for incarcerated survivors. So I'm in JDI's Washington, D.C. office, and so I'm participating today from my home in Maryland. Next slide, please. So big picture, JDI, or Just Detention International, is a health and human rights organization that seeks to end sexual abuse in all forms of detention. Next slide. And there's a few different ways that we do that. We work closely with corrections officials, but also with rape crisis advocates and policymakers to help ensure that detention facilities are safe, that survivors have access to services, and that, as appropriate with the right funding, that there's also access to funding to do this kind of work. We promote public attitudes that value the dignity and safety of people in detention and support incarcerated survivors of sexual abuse and sexual harassment. Next slide. And the core principle behind all of this work really is just the idea that it doesn't matter what crime a person may have committed, what they may be accused of, or what they might have been convicted of. Rape certainly is never part of the penalty. Next slide. Great. So before going on, I want to definitely invite Ali and then Nisa to introduce themselves and their programs. I'm sorry, guys, the way that we did the slides, like your introduction, yeah, there you go. You can just fast forward that way. Thanks. Sorry, Ali.
You're good. You're good. It's, technology, right? I sit in a space where I'm convinced, right, that after all these, not all these years, but enough of these times in Zoom that I'll have it like figured out, and I just don't. So we're here, we're doing it, we're making it work. So my name is Ali Jacobs. I am here today from the Houston Area Women's Center. A little bit just briefly about the organization, a slide that has our vision and mission. In short, we are a nonprofit agency in the Houston area, and we provide services to all survivors of domestic and sexual violence, including sex trafficking. Some of the services that we have range from advocacy, counseling, education, shelter, support services. And the most important part of that is our services are free, confidential, and available to everyone. In regards to a more in-depth look about what the agency does, our services fall into kind of three buckets. One being crisis response. This is going to look like our 24-hour services. So we have two 24/7 hotlines that allow survivors to access safety planning and support services as they can in hours that may be safe for them. And this does include, we're expanding to chat, just as this technology tapping into that, it's a helpful access point for survivors, especially some of our younger survivors. As part of our mission, we're interested in ending experiences of violence in all people's lives. And that involves us being out in the community, providing that education and advocacy and outreach. So the second bucket is going to look like the violence prevention and culture shifts, right? Getting to and addressing the root causes of violence. I fall in the survivor empowerment category. This is going to look more like our long-term services, housing assistance, legal advocacy, career development, and financial empowerment, and the counseling and advocacy department. This is just my contact information. One of the things that has been a world of support in stepping into this PREA space is having other individuals in this work, doing this work, and being able to bounce ideas off of them and learn from them and say like, this is really challenging. What are you doing? How can I change this? So if we can be of support in any way, by all means, please reach out. I've been with the agency in August, I'm starting my 17th year, long time. And this PREA services has been happening for a number of years, and really something that I took over and the oversight of it, and it has been a space that has been very successful, but success looks like this arrow that has like all these crazy curves because there's a number of challenges. So again, if we can be of support, by all means, please reach out. These are a little bit of the PREA partnerships that we have, just so they're documented. And then this will come up kind of throughout the conversation, and I'll explain those a little bit more in those spaces. And again, just some agency contact information on Instagram and our social media. So I'll roll it over to Nisa so she is able to introduce herself. And Nisa, just shout at me when you need a slide change.
Okay, thank you. I should be like right after yours. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nisa. I'm the lead crisis intervention specialist at the Rape Crisis Centers in San Antonio. You have my email address there in case, like Ali said, like if you need anything, collaboration is really important. We have to get creative and, figuring out how to ensure that these PREA services are available to our incarcerated clients. So, having that support with our peers is crucial doing this work. You want to go to the next slide? Thank you. So I kind of was real brief about our RCC services, and I used a picture of our office building there. It's a really nice location in San Antonio. If you ever want to stop by, people are always welcome. So we have our 24/7 crisis hotline. It's our crisis intervention department. We also handle online chats, incoming crisis calls, our walk-in crisis clients. Anybody can come in between 8 to 5 to our office if they're needing like immediate support, and we'll sit down with them and try to figure out how best to serve them. And then we have our client advocacy department. They do our law enforcement accompaniment, our court accompaniment, hospital accompaniment, and then they also do some case management work. We have our counseling department that does the individual, group, and family counseling services, and all of our counseling, advocacy, and all of our services are completely free as well. The only way we're going to ensure that our services are truly accessible is making sure that they are free, and that's the only way that they'll really be truly accessible. And then we also have our education and outreach program. They do really amazing work to do preventative work in our community with victim serving professionals, and anybody can put in a request for an education or outreach presentation to be done, or for us to come to an event that they're having. We do lots of tabling events. So that's kind of brief about our services. And then do you want to go to the next slide? And then we have here our timeline of PREA support partnerships. This all started long before I got here at the RCC. I've actually been here for 4 years now. Our kind of PREA timeline starts in December of 2014 with our local jail, which is the Bexar County Jail right downtown in San Antonio. And then you can see we added a pretty diverse set of correctional facilities and, juvenile detention and immigration detention facilities. We also have some community correctional facilities that we work with. I actually was at Crosspoint last week doing a training with their staff about, being a first responder, to someone making an outcry and responses to trauma and, letting them know, because some of the staff are new. So I was talking about like what services that we can offer and how we provide support to people. And then you can see up until September of 2021, we were lucky. Our directors worked really hard, meeting with TDCJ and sending MOUs back and forth, which is a long process. And we're able to get us some agreements with the facilities that you see there. Let me see the next slide. Okay, so I kind of was a little overzealous and started answering the questions before, but we'll go back so Cynthia can take back over and yeah.
Great, thank you both. So as you can see, I've had the benefit of working with two really amazing programs, and I think Houston Area Women's Center and the Rape Crisis Center in San Antonio have managed to just accomplish quite a lot when it comes to serving survivors who are incarcerated. And I think, what's going to be great as we get further into the discussion is to hear more about how they've managed to do that and what advice they have for doing that, even in the midst of this difficult moment of, COVID and funding restrictions and all of that. So now what we want to do is just hear a little bit from all of you. And I wonder if what you can do is use the chat to just tell us, has your program provided services to incarcerated survivors during these past 2 years? So that being, we're mid 2022 now, when you kind of think back to mid 2020, when we were a few months into the pandemic, in these past 2 years, has your program been able to do that work? Just kind of a yes or no. And if you want to say either what program you're with or kind of, however you want to answer that, that would be helpful just to get a sense of whether that's something that folks have been able to do. Okay, so Tammy has put something in the chat. Can others? It can be a no, it can be a yes, it can be yes, but we've cut way back from where we were before. It would just be helpful to have a little bit of a feel for who's in the room, so to speak, when it comes to provision of services for incarcerated folks. Anyone else? I've only got 2 people who volunteered an answer there. And I got more questions coming, so you guys got to speak up. Okay, so let's go to the next question. Great. Okay, so a few folks responded. Thank you. It sounds like it's a 50-50 sort of, some yes, some no. So has your program's capacity to provide these services been negatively impacted by state level funding restrictions, such as on the use of VOCA and VAWA funds? So when you think about, these past couple years, has your program's capacity to do this and to provide services for incarcerated survivors been negatively impacted by, state level funding restrictions to the degree that such as around VOCA and VAWA, the Victims of Crime Act and Violence Against Women Act funds? We'll just give people a moment to respond to that. At times, yes. Okay, that's helpful. Okay, let's go to the next slide. We'll just pull in the next question while. And so if your program, your program's capacity, so here's Letty, if I'm pronouncing your name right, from Houston Area Women's Center. We lost 2 positions for PREA work during the pandemic. Yeah. Allie knows all about that. So, so if there have been these types of, impact, what steps has your program taken to maintain access to services for incarcerated survivors? And certainly I pose that question because it feels like it's really central to the discussion today. And I look forward to Nisa and Allie sharing about, the specific steps that their programs have taken. But certainly if others around the state have taken, different strategies to minimize this impact and maintain services for incarcerated survivors. I put the question there now. Feel free to respond in the chat. Juanita says yes. Juanita, if you want to say, any steps your program has taken to maintain access, that would be terrific. And then did we have one more question? Can you go to the next slide, Allie? Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to ask, because I didn't want to be short-sighted, and thanks Jennifer in the chat is saying incarcerated survivors can call our hotline and we'll provide services virtually. So that's great, right? At least you're continuing to provide services virtually. But I just wanted to be cognizant of the fact that we live in a very dynamic world, right? So it's not just COVID, right? Look, that's enough as it is, COVID, funding restrictions, but what else might be going on that is, facing, that your programs are facing that might in some way threaten or compromise sustainability. And I know it's always a hard time for victim services programs, right? You're always under-resourced. You never have the funding and the staff that you need to do the work. And there's always so much work to do. And as our awareness around sexual violence grows, in many ways, it feels like, there's more work to do because more people kind of realize like, oh, what happened to me is not right. And maybe I need help. So you can either respond to that in the chat or just keep it in mind as we're discussing, like, what are the other realities that you're grappling with at the same time? Okay, next slide, please. Great. So yeah, so Allie, I'll turn it. I don't know if you wanted to say anything else now, Allie, in terms of any of those questions around just telling a little bit of the Houston Area Women's Center's story around all of this and services for incarcerated survivors. And, someone mentioned in the chat that you lost 2 positions. And so how did you regroup and pivot, and how have you continued to try to provide these services? And I'm asking a lot at one time, but I also really love these pod walks that you used to go on, and just would also love to hear about some of your great strategies.
Thank you. Yeah. So feel free, like if there's questions that come up, to use the chat, but also feel free to jump off of mute and just shout them out, knowing that that's another option if that is easier, just in question asking. So a little bit about Hawk's experience, the experience of the Houston Area Women's Center. So we began PREA services, and let me acknowledge my own kind of ignorance to this population, to this service, to PREA in general, right? Like, it was not something, and is still not something that there's, I think, as much awareness and recognition for as there ought to be as a federal mandate. Even within detention facilities, we engage with staff within those facilities, and they're like, Priya, what? Hold on. Like, it's a something quick in their training, and they've got to like check the box. And then you have other instances where it's fantastic, right? So we started these services. It really was through a partnership with Harris County Sheriff's Office. And I was not in oversight of the program at that time. So I am also learning, turning backwards to see what has worked for us as an organization. And after kind of the PREA mandate came down, and recognizing that having a partnership was critical, Harris County Sheriff's Office reached out, and we began that partnership with them offering to pay for the services for our time spent. So it was something that the Houston Area Women's Center became a subcontracting of the Harris County Sheriff's Office. And we were able to see the survivors that were as a direct referral. So in that, right, acknowledging the barriers and the challenges that an individual who has experienced sexual violence, right, we know it is the most underreported crime, and now we're also looking at making a report of that crime in a punitive facility for some individuals. So that partnership expanded. We received VOCA VAWA funding that allowed us to expand our PREA services. And in that expansion, we had advocates dedicated to PREA services, and we were able to expand and incorporate additional facilities and locations, which was kind of that slide that I'll bring it back up at some point. And in that, the funding changes, we were not able to maintain those positions. So PREA services are still something that is aligned with our mission and an area that we will continue providing services, but it has been incorporated by other staff. It has been absorbed. So still sticking to the service provision, but in a much different way that we used to. So as Cynthia shared, one of the things that we felt strongly about in our service delivery is being able to provide all individuals access to our services, whether there was a report or not a report. So in our second version of PREA, when we had the funded staff, we would engage in something that we kind of term as pod walks. So we would be receiving referrals from the PREA coordinators, as well as while we were at the facilities, walking around, talking about HAWK services. So that way an individual could disclose to us one-on-one without looping in the PREA coordinator for that referral. So really making sure that we were doing our part to eliminate barriers. In some of our funding opportunities, one of the things that I feel most proud of is we created a video in partnership Harris County Sheriff's Office, and we had both facility staff as well as HAWK staff, in addition to survivors who had accessed our services, do a PREA 101 video that actually is on loop in Harris County Sheriff's Office in the intake area. So that way we were providing individuals with the information that they deserve, with how to access our services, but also hear the benefits and the impact of having received those services. So those are just kind of some of the steps that we've taken in order to navigate those challenges. And like I said, services within this population, success is continued process moving forward. And that success in some days looks like a fantastic leap, and other days it looks like an inch crawl. But making sure that we stay dedicated to this and really examining the ways and barriers that we're preventing access to support, so we can pivot and adjust and make sure that individuals have access to support.
Allie, is there any chance of seeing the video?
Yes, I can. I need to search for it in my email, but yes, I can share a clip of it. Absolutely.
Okay. Let's see. So in the meantime, what's the easiest way to do this? I guess I'll look at my slides separately while you're kind of pulling that up, and then we can talk to you a little bit, Nisa, if that makes sense. So you also shared, Nisa, a really rich sort of history of partnerships that that the Rape Crisis Center has engaged in over the past decade or so. And I'm just going to read a little bit from some of your slides to remind us of where things are for you guys. So you have continued to provide PREA services. You've tried to maintain as close to your normal level of services as possible, but the sudden change to remote work, so there you go, there's another layer of challenge, remote work, and the limitations in correctional settings created barriers. And I do want to note that there was something that someone posted in the chat also around those barriers. That was Jennifer, who was saying that the distance to incarcerated survivors is a struggle, and not gaining access to in-person access to the survivor is also a struggle. And absolutely, we see that quite a lot. And so Nisa, you had described that you guys still offer phone and letter correspondence. You're trying to maintain hospital accompaniment, but that's more of a challenge. And because of restrictions in place at hospitals, which is not something I had even, been thinking kind of at the front of my mind about, but the restrictions at the hospital level had also forced you to limit the number of people entering the hospital. And so then at times you had to provide tele-advocacy. So do you want to say anything about some of this and some of these changes that you've had to make?
Yeah, so a lot of it was like I had kind of said, like barriers to overcome. And when I and like those first slides, I was kind of talking about like early on in the pandemic, like changing from, because we were always in a position where it was like, no, like we have to be in the office at all times for like the 24-hour hotline services, right? We would work overnights there, answer calls and all that. And then, having to move to remote work, it was like, okay, how are we going to answer calls? How are we going to, have a system to be able to continue responding to our chats? And, the restrictions were more like at the beginning of the pandemic for the hospital for sure. And they kind of were like off and on given like the spikes and everything in like 2021. But we're definitely like back at the hospital full time now. And so that's been great because it's really hard to do those tele-advocacy services. I know the nurses had a hard time navigating them, and then like our staff as well, because we want to make sure we're providing people support. And, sometimes for survivors that feels a little uncomfortable to be like sitting on the phone with someone, while you're going through the exam process, or, so it was a lot of trying to figure that part out, but we definitely were able to maintain, our hotline services and like our letter correspondence, but we saw a dip in people calling us. Like we would get sporadic calls like early in the morning. It was like people calling, and it was like, oh, I wasn't actually trying to call you guys. I'm trying to call my family. We're restricted on our phone access because of COVID. And, a lot of places were on and off lockdown and still are on and off lockdown, given the situation with the pandemic continuing. And, a lot of times that was talking to us, and seeking PREA services was put on the back burner for not just the staff in correctional facilities, but for the survivors inside, because that phone time was crucial for them to be able to know what's going on the outside world, to be able to ask their family members to send them, the resources that they need, like if they need money or, sorry, I apologize to the interpreters, I'm talking too fast. Yeah, so we really tried to, make sure we were engaging with people where we could, and, when they did need us. And even that just before the pandemic can be kind of tough given the situation with where phones are located and that they have access to where they can call us from. A lot of times folks are calling us from a day room, and, when you have other inmates or residents inside of a day room, it kind of limits your ability to be able to be free to speak on the phone with everyone else, around you. But I'm trying to think, we definitely saw an increase in our letter correspondence. We have more people writing to us now, which is really exciting. And we definitely are happy to see that, and having people, communicate with us more long-term, not just sending one letter to get resources and, we don't ever hear from them again. So I think by word of mouth, we're starting to get more letters from facilities that we partner with, or people have heard of us. We get letters from non-partner facilities, and we still respond to every letter. So it kind of has given and taken, with the shift related to, the maintaining services. Sorry, I don't know if Allie's waiting for me or no. Okay. But yeah, so I guess we can, let me see. And then, so we did also have like the same issue with kind of like losing funding and then getting funding back related to like PREA services. And given that all of our crisis hotline staff answer PREA calls, they come in the phone, same as calls from the community. We were able to, our grant manager and our directors and finance staff members worked really hard to make sure that we were, they had to like move us around to different grants and all that to make sure we maintained our staff. And then we're also able to still provide PREA services and stay within the restrictions of, the certain grant funding. But I know that it was a lot of work for them. And we were definitely, trying to figure out the best way to make sure that we were still able to maintain our services as much as possible.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting, Nisa, is that you've really pointed to how skill sets might need to shift a little bit as well. I mean, a lot of advocates are not all that accustomed to like letter correspondence. And so, having to really think about the fact that for incarcerated survivors, often letters can be one of the best ways to kind of stay in touch with the outside world. And it does or can afford a level of privacy that other types of, being on the phone, for example, might not afford. And so, for that reason, it's really important to make sure that you can correspond confidentially. And so I just wanted to ask, is that something that you've been able to get into place where your letter correspondence is treated confidentially by the facilities?
Yes, it was not an easy task. My mentor, Allison, she was previously our crisis hotline manager. Her and I both worked really hard to brainstorm. And like, I think I kind of said it earlier, you have to be really creative to try to figure out how to make these things work. But with our partner facilities that we have an MOU with, when we onboard with them and we have like an actual checklist of things that we go over with them of, learning about their facility and what things are available for survivors, how can they access mental health services and, just overall about their facility. And then they learn from us, the way that we basically do it with our partner facilities is I'll get a letter, I'll, respond to that letter. I will address like a regular, white envelope, the way that I would address it normally if I was just sending it in the mail. But then that goes into a larger like manila envelope that is sent directly to the PREA coordinator. And then the PREA coordinator doesn't read through the letter, but they will open it up in front of the person who wrote to us. And then, they do like their security protocols because we wanted to also respect that they have security protocols for a reason with the way that they handle their mail. But we also want to make sure that we're protecting the survivors' privacy and confidentiality, and not having that letter that we're writing back to them, go through a mail room with several people looking at it that don't need to be accessing that private information. And it's worked for us so far. So.
Yeah, it sounds like the mail is being treated on par with legal mail, which is really what you want, right? Obviously, legal mail doesn't go to the PREA coordinator, but the idea of the mail to and from the advocates only being opened, not read, but just open for contraband and opened in front of that incarcerated survivor so that they can see the process and see, what has happened with that mail that's so sensitive. So, exactly. Yeah, great. Was there anything else you wanted to comment on, Nisa, from your slides, or should we pull your slides back up? Sorry, I sort of bumped.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I've been agonizing and looking over them all morning, so I'm good. I figured maybe when we talk about like the auditors and auditing, like then I'll have more to contribute to.
Okay. And then Allie, is this a good time? Do you want to show the video?
Absolutely. And look, Haley is in the crowd. Haley and I have been navigating MOU processes. So as another challenge is securing those MOUs, but it is helpful having people that you can directly communicate with and to converse and be able to not just send a random email. That has been really helpful in navigating those partnerships, is really having someone who is an advocate on the inside, right? Who recognizes PREA. The importance of PREA has definitely been integral into our success. And again, our success comes with a plethora of challenges. So I will screen share too. This is our video overall that we were able to make with funding is quite long, because it does have a good amount of information that an individual would need to feel informed. So I'll show a couple clips of it. And again, it was in partnership with Harris County Sheriff's Office. This is just the title and some info about it. It was with the Moss Group, who has done other similar videos. So someone, again, who had knowledge, who's working in this mission, who could support us in creating it. And then this is the This is the start of the video. You know what? Hold on, because I can promise you I didn't turn on the sound. So let's try again.
My first moment coming into jail for my first time ever was very scary.
I was at the age of 17, first time being arrested as an adult.
I couldn't believe that I was being arrested. I was scared. I was really scared.
At that moment, you really feel like you're taken away from the world. Nobody knows what's going on.
Okay, everyone, come outside. I'll help you if you need help getting off the steps.
And I was feeling nervous.
Shocked. Frustrated.
Oh, I was alone, very alone.
So when the shackles come off, it's really when it's like scary.
And then to realize that, no, you're not getting to walk on the other side of those doors. That's when the reality hit me, and that's when I got terrified.
So that is the first portion. Again, we had survivors who had accessed services participate, and I think it creates a very humanizing experience to understand and see somebody speak about their experience and the importance of access to these services. We, and I can find another clip too that provides a little bit more. In that it was so important that we had those voices, right? We're here as advocates to shout up voices of survivors. It was really important that we had those individuals participating with us in that. Here's a little bit additional in kind of another clip.
This video provides you with some important information on how to report sexual abuse and sexual harassment, as well as services available to you if you are a victim of sexual abuse or harassment.
Sexual abuse isn't common inside our jail. However, we want to make sure you have the information you need to be safe and report any issues. At the Harris County Jail, we follow the Prison Rape Elimination Act, also known as PREA, a federal law.
Under the law, through our own agency's policies, we are committed to zero tolerance of sexual abuse and harassment. You have the right to be free from sexual abuse and sexual harassment from other inmates and from staff, volunteers, and contractors while you are at the Harris County Jail.
There are also resources available to you while you are here that can provide counseling services and ongoing support even after you leave the jail. We are committed to creating a safe, secure, and respectful environment for all.
Now you will hear from staff, community providers, and inmates who will speak to you honestly and give you information that can increase your safety at the Harris County Jail. Thank you for your attention.
The next clips go into a little bit in the process of making the calls, how we operate as an agency and providing those services. And again, this is a lengthy video that does have a number of partners featured, and this is shown in the intake area of Harris County Sheriff's Office. We have the subtitles on there, and we have them available in both an English and Spanish version, but the subtitles were really important to one, create that accessibility, but recognizing the noise and the distractions, all of the stuff going on within that, space. And this is shown on a loop within the facility in order to inform people of their rights, to inform of PREA, to inform of the agency support and services, but also kind of the policies that happen within the detention facility itself. So it is intended to be useful and informative, but also allowing an individual space to know that support is available, and to process what that support actually looks like.
Great.
Is there any specific questions about the video from anybody either?
Yeah, just to second what Allie's saying, before, definitely any questions about the video to start. And honestly, I'd love to also just invite folks to turn your cameras on. I think we definitely want to move into more discussion in this part of the presentation of the workshop. And so being able to just, see everyone's lovely faces, if you're comfortable turning your camera on, is always a great way to promote discussion and involvement. So any questions or reactions? I mean, I quite liked the video, Allie, and I loved the diversity of the survivors, that you had people of various ethnicities, and also apparently like different gender identities, and I thought it was quite good.
Yeah, and I think that is the intent, right? To elevate survivors' voices, to recognize that sexual violence happens to a wide variety of individuals, and to make sure that we're remaining in a space that is inclusive, that is validating of people's experiences, and making sure that they can be seen and heard in a way that supports their empowerment and furthers their healing, rather than, vice versa. Rather than the other side of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So questions, and if folks don't have questions about the video, what I would love to do is open up this space for questions, discussion, comments around your work with incarcerated survivors more broadly, whether it goes to funding or whether it goes to strategy questions. We're even fortunate enough, as Allie pointed out, to have Haley from TDCJ on. I think this is a really great opportunity for anyone who's hoping to strengthen your service provision for incarcerated survivors, to get input and advice. And so, please take advantage of the moment and share with us around your questions and best practices and successes while we're all here. And I did, oh, go ahead, Allie. Go ahead.
Not all at once.
Right, exactly, yeah. And I did want to just invite Haley. I don't know if you want to, say a little more. It's really exciting to have you on today, and I appreciate you, joining the conversation. I think that, over time, various programs have found that it's been challenging at times trying to establish those partnerships with TDCJ. So I would love to not put you on the spot, but just to say a little bit about, for any program that's on here that might have a facility, a TDCJ facility in its service area, and interested in providing services at that facility. Can you just say a little bit about what that might look like in terms of being able to get in touch with you, or being able to begin that sort of partnership? Okay, so yeah, so it sounds like this is Haley here. If any of you are interested in partnering with TDCJ to provide services to any of our units, please contact me. And Haley has provided a number here, 936-437-8985. So thank you, Haley, for that. Oh, and also a email address, haley.bowen, BOAEN @tdcj.texas.gov. Okay, so other questions or comments so far? Okay. Okay. And so Allie or Nissa, if you didn't have specific things, I guess what we can do is go back to the PowerPoint and just kind of continue along with what we had laid out there.
Do you want to share that if you have it up? If not, I can grab it.
Okay, if you can grab it, that would be great. Thank you. Yeah.
Look, I closed one to open the other.
Oh, okay, okay.
Stuff you got to do with technology. Okay. We have. Sorry, and get to the slide. Okay, here we are. Okay.
Okay. Okay, great. So this is around funding services for incarcerated survivors. I just wanted to kind of just talk a little bit about some of the different options for how to fund services for incarcerated survivors, and certainly that has been touched on so far today. I don't think I have a ton to say about it, but for example, we have seen a couple of different models used around the country. So in Massachusetts, for example, the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center is under contract with a couple of different corrections agencies in the state of Massachusetts to provide services for incarcerated survivors. So it's kind of a contractual situation where they are receiving a certain amount each year to provide those services, kind of a range of services, including hotline services for incarcerated survivors at the respective agencies. In South Carolina, we've seen kind of also a contract where I believe this might have been the local program, actually, not the coalition, but the local program was receiving like a certain amount per bed, but it was a flat rate, right? So that flat rate might have been, something like $3 or $5 per year for each incarcerated person who was incarcerated in a particular facility within the South Carolina Department of Corrections would go to that, would be the amount that program would receive. And one of the things that advocates have pointed out is that it is beneficial to receive like a contract or flat rate as opposed to like a fee for service, because a fee for service model can raise concerns around confidentiality and privacy. Like you have to be careful, especially if you're in a facility where not that many requests for services are being made, and then you're having to kind of ask for, that fee to be paid or that reimbursement to be paid per service. How is that notification going to be made? How much information? What are you going to be sharing with the facility? around, what is the amount and what are the services that you're looking to be reimbursed for or to be paid that fee for. Another type of approach that we've seen is in California. There actually have been a program set up by the California Office of Emergency Services that at one time was providing programs with grants to fund individual positions to work to provide services for incarcerated survivors. So that's a great model as well. Of course, we never want to see a scenario where all, quote unquote, of the work related to incarcerated survivors is relegated to one person. Like somebody was saying, I don't know if it was you, Nisa, or somebody else was talking about when you have a hotline and everyone who's on the hotline answers all types of calls, right? That was you, including from incarcerated survivors, as opposed to a scenario where you just have like one person taking all of those calls or a couple of people, and the work becomes siloed in a way that's not kind of supportive and it doesn't engender the work throughout the organization. It leaves kind of a lot of people in the organization feeling like, okay, that's something that those people over there do, as opposed to something that we're all committed to and we're all involved in. So I really like, the model, Nisa, of everyone who answers the hotline answering calls from incarcerated survivors, because I've definitely seen from a technical assistance perspective programs where you have, even if theoretically everyone is taking those calls, there might be less comfort. There might be, one person who feels like they have to step in and call people back. Like I remember a program that I was working with that said, okay, we all take the calls, but most of the people who answer the calls, when they get a call from an incarcerated survivor, they're not very comfortable with those calls. So they sort of default to a position of like trying to take a report as opposed to like providing emotional support. And it was up to that one, PREA person to then arrange like an individual call with that survivor, where they would call the person or have the person call them from an office at the facility. But that would be very difficult because then that requires kind of more involvement from staff. And we're in a moment where, a lot of facilities are especially kind of stretched thin with their staff. Not to mention that, again, you have staff at the program who needed to have an increased comfort level around working with incarcerated survivors in meaningful ways, right? And not sort of defaulting to a very problematic, position of like, oh, I'm largely here to take reports, which is, clearly is not really the role of a victim services program.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, so like everybody takes all of the calls. I'm the one who primarily handles the letters, but with us having more incoming, I'm thinking about having some of our full-time staff also, help me out on that. So I'd probably, I'm going to take the time to like sit with them and talk to them like about the resources that I've kind of curated of, what I send to people if they're asking for resources, how we can provide support in writing and, what it needs to look like when we're setting those up. But we definitely try to make sure that, full-time, part-time, volunteer, everyone is trained on how to work with survivors, how to respond to them. I've done trainings with our advocates who do the hospital accompaniments about, what's it going to look like when you have a survivor who's incarcerated and coming in for an exam, and how to, work with them. And like, we're big on, we really emphasize, this support is still, just the same for anyone else. It's judgment free. We're there to be client led, trauma informed, just the same as everyone else. And we do, all when we do like all of our onboarding and everybody does the OAG training and all that, PREA training is a big part of that as well.
That's great. Thanks. Other questions or comments from anybody while we're, kind of at this juncture of thinking around funding, how to fund services and how to keep the funding going?
I want to encourage people to advocate like for their needs as an organization, right? I think it is common that a lot of the facilities, those that do approach you for these services, are looking for a free service. And I think being able to advocate for being there as a free service, but also the importance of potentially navigating in the future some of these models, right? These models of having it a funded service allow for a staff person's dedicated time to these survivors rather than fitting it in. And one of the things that is really hard with that fitting it in model is the schedules and the barriers that exist within the facilities. So it's not just fitting it into your schedule, it's also fitting it into the survivor schedule. It's navigating phone calls and you're like calling and trying to get to people, but they're somewhere else, and all of that. Having someone who has the ability to go up to a location and spend the time that may be needed in order to access that survivor, just having that dedicated staff member is just really beneficial. So I think being able to present that as an option and also navigate some of those expectations, because the expectation is on a facility side, we need to get this taken care of. We want you here. We, as the survivor, has the right to, right? Not to wait for us to come. But that can be challenging. So in another way of navigating those barriers and spaces, if that can be negotiated anyway, it has been really helpful. And we see that in that process with the Harris County Sheriff's Office for us, just the ability to respond in a timely, sensitive manner as a survivor deserves.
Yeah, I really can't sort of agree more, Allie. That's such an important point. I think one thing that's a little bit unfortunate sometimes is that because this space of detention can feel kind of intimidating, kind of new, a little bit, foreboding. I think a lot of times, unfortunately, advocacy programs tend to defer to what the facilities and the corrections agencies say, and kind of, if they're asked to do something for free, they might just go ahead and lean into that. But there's no reason why, as Allie is saying, you should not ask for that funding, at the very least, to be getting reimbursed. For example, if you're spending money going to provide hospital accompaniment or driving to the facility to provide in-person counseling sessions, or to provide training for staff, like, go ahead and ask and see what the possibilities are. You may get a no, and that then puts you in the position of still trying to figure out how you're going to pay for that time. But certainly it's very much, something that you should, kind of go into your conversations with corrections officials, knowing who you are, what your role is, and what your needs are, that you're not going to compromise when it comes to confidentiality, the same way that you wouldn't compromise on confidentiality for someone in the community. And that you do need certain types of funding to do this work, and maybe kind of what those different levels of options look like. Knowing that, okay, you may not get all your costs covered, but that, at the very least, again, can you be reimbursed for expenses and things like that? And a lot of times I think corrections officials will suffer from just their own lack of knowledge. They're sort of looking at your program and assuming, oh, hey, this is something they're supposed to be doing. And yes, rape crisis programs are supposed to serve all survivors, but rape crisis advocates are not bound under the Prison Rape Elimination Act. It is the corrections agencies that are bound legally to figure out how to do this. And so they need to approach advocates in a meaningful way, not in a way that says, oh, hurry, 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 we're about to be audited next month, you need to sign this agreement, or hurry down here so that we can show that we have some involvement from rape crisis advocates, or do all of these things that we're asking you, and no, we have no money to give you. You know, sometimes it really is as simple as kind of letting, you know, having a meeting, right? Hopefully in person, or, you know, by Zoom, if that's the best. And letting your corrections partners know who you are, what your program provides, what are the realities that you're working within, right? Whether that's around confidentiality, whether that's within the range of kind of work that you're doing and types of survivors who you're serving, letting them know what your expertise is, that you and your staff have very deep expertise and around working with law enforcement, around working with evidence, such as, you know, evidence that's collected during a medical forensic exam. A lot of corrections officials have very little knowledge about what rape crisis advocates do, and about the very kind of deep expertise and judgment that you all bring to this work. And that's something that, I'm not a rape crisis advocate, but it's something that upsets me quite a bit. And I find myself doing quite a lot of advocacy just to make sure that corrections partners understand the gravity of what, you know, of what rape crisis advocates and other victim advocates are bringing to the table. And you need to be treated with respect, and there needs to be respect for your obligations when it comes to confidentiality and the demands on your time and all of the things that you have to do. So I can't say that enough.
Mm-hmm.
Questions about any of that? Oh, this is Haley. When we finalize an MOU, we have our wardens and staff set up a meet and greet so they get to know each other. I think that's great, Allie. I would even encourage a meet and greet, you know, a meeting, and maybe this is something that you do. But so yes, it's great to get the MOU finalized, and then to make sure all of the key people know each other. I think in order to kind of come up with the MOU, I would encourage meetings beforehand as well. I would very much encourage a tour. I know tours can be tough right now because of COVID, but to the degree that an advocate can come in and go to some key areas in the facility that are not on lockdown, for example, if it's something where certain housing units are being locked down, still, you know, very much try to push to have that tour, because it's very critical in the same way that you might think about the campus setting for survivors of sexual assault, you know, on a campus, or you know, all of the different settings in which sexual violence takes place. It's very important to understand the dynamics of life inside of a corrections facility and inside of the particular corrections facilities that you're serving, and what it is that that survivor kind of sees when they think about accessing services. So the great point that Nisa made of like, look, during the pandemic, folks were struggling with like, okay, I have an hour and a half out of my cell today. Do I take a shower? Do I go make a phone call? How long is the line? How long is it going to take for me to make that phone call? Do I even have time to even think about calling that rape crisis hotline, even though I feel like I am in crisis and would very much, you know, need that support? Do I go to commissary? Do I go, you know, so it's, you know, I think having a sense of what that reality is, what does it look like when you go to the phone bank in the day room? Like, what is the environment that people are calling you in? Why are they whispering? They're whispering because maybe somebody is listening in on the call. So I think, you know, all of that is extremely important. And again, advocating for what you need, and not just, you know, I think a lot of corrections officials are accustomed to kind of saying, oh, this is what it is, you know, and part of your job as an advocate isn't necessarily just advocating for specific clients. It's advocating for your services, for your involvement, and being able to say, actually, you know what, it's really important for us to have that tour, or it's really important for us to come and meet you, or it's really important to know that even after that MOU is signed, we are going to have a meeting, you know, every month, every quarter, because a lot of what I've heard from advocates in Texas is the problem of after the MOU, you know, sounds a little bit like after the first date, right? Like, what happens? Do I hear from you again? Do I have to call you and chase you down? Are you going to call me? Is this meaningful? You know, so with the MOU, you want to know that, you know, it's not just that the MOU has been signed, but folks are able to call the hotline. They're able to write a letter. They're able to get the information, you know, that periodically someone is testing the hotline and making sure it actually works and goes to where it's supposed to go. So the only way to keep all that going is to have meetings set up on a regular basis. And it's, you know, I don't know, Allie and Nisa, if you want to speak to those challenges, but I know those are really real challenges for programs around the country. I don't mean to just call out Texas, it's just because we're in Texas, but like, you know, those are real challenges.
Yeah. Nisa, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, so the way that Allison had kind of set stuff up when she was the crisis line manager was she was doing check-in calls like every couple of months or so, or, you know, what she felt was appropriate for like each facility. Because you're definitely right. Like, you'll sign an MOU, we'll go through our checklist together, we'll do the test calls and, you know, set those services up. And then it's like, we're not getting calls from the facilities. We're not getting, you know, mail from anybody, or, you know, we're not hearing from them. And so we'll call and we'll do a check-in call and, you know, want to make sure that the phones are working. We will talk about, you know, are there any like trainings or, you know, things that we can offer you and your staff? You know, we're happy to come in the facility and do a training with you guys. We're happy to come in and talk to your staff about what our services are in case they talk to a survivor and they need, you know, something so that they know what's available for them. You know, the issue is like, they have to make the effort on their part to, you know, take you up on it. But, you know, when you're setting up that MOU, you can definitely, you know, make that a part of it of, you know, we want to have every 6 months, we, you know, have a meeting and check in on how things are going and follow up about stuff and, you know, finding what works for what services you have. Because I know that we don't go into facilities to offer services as much as we would like to. But we still do like, you know, okay, we need to do check-ins about the phones, or, you know, are there services that we can offer, or, you know, trainings or anything like that for the staff. Yeah.
Yeah, and Nisa, those, oh, sorry, Allie, I'll just say one thing, that Nisa, those trainings that you all are doing are so vitally important, because not only then do staff understand more about the services and then they're able to answer questions from incarcerated survivors, but there's also something that happens around staff kind of understanding, oh, that's what this is all about, and that's who these people are. This is what they can offer, and a whole new level, I think, of respect and, you know, engagement that can come from that. And just by virtue of you being in the facility, that sends a message. You may only go in there once every 6 months and do an in-person training, but word gets around in a facility. People know, you know, that you're there. And that helps to send the message to the incarcerated population that, hey, they are doing something, right? There may be all kinds of safety issues and concerns about this facility, but yes, those people from such and such, from the rape crisis program, were here today. And you know what? I think I might actually feel safe enough to call the hotline, because you can put all the services in place that you want, but if folks who are in that facility don't feel safe, they're not going to use it. You have to work on, you know, you got to think about the culture change. And I know that that's a lot and a whole other level beyond, you know, the capacity and the bandwidth that many of you have, but just for your own context, I want you to kind of know that, right? And so some of the scandals and things that you see happening at different facilities around the country, Dublin Federal Prison in California, Edna Mahan facility in New Jersey. Those are facilities that have been dangerous for people, that are not safe, and without a real adherence and commitment to reducing violence and respecting people and respecting the dignity of people, you're not going to have a facility where people feel safe accessing services. So the more that you're able to go in and engage and train and just let people know that you're there. And that's why I love those pod walks, Allie. I mean, it's so great that people were able to talk to you directly, but imagine the impact of people seeing you there. Like, they are here, they are among us, they respect us, they want to bring us services, and this facility is allowing this. That means a great deal. And sorry, Allie, I had cut you off.
No, you're good. I think you made a really fantastic points in elevating the advocacy for survivors. I think some of the challenges that we have run into and spaces that are important for us to continue revisiting with our partners engaging in this work is navigating what I would consider basic things that may or may not be basic to a facility staff member. So making sure that you have spaces to negotiate what a safe space looks like to meet with the survivor, and making sure that it is, I don't know, welcoming is like a term you would use frequently with it, but that it is inviting, that it feels safe, that it is the same space each time that you visit to build that trust and the nature of safety in that location. I think being able to communicate with facility staff about the time that you show up is the time that you've communicated with the survivor. So the delays that a facility staff member puts in place, or the individual's not available now, or, well, you can get in a couple hours, that also has a detrimental impact on rapport and the therapeutic relationship, the supportive relationship that you're building with that survivor, right? It looks like you didn't show up versus, well, they wouldn't let me access you. Like, being able to say, no, this is an MOU that has been established. These are the spaces. This is the time. Like, going in there emboldened in advocating in the same way that you would for a survivor stepping into your building, you're stepping into that space to be that person for that survivor. So shoot high in that, because it can be done, but you have to ask for it. Like, you have to place importance behind it and lean into that as well.
So I did want to say just a little bit about audits, if we can go to the next slide. So I don't know how many of you have been able to engage in advocacy around the audits. I mean, what is supposed to happen under the Prison Rape Elimination Act standards is that, of course, facilities are supposed to be audited every 3 years. And when a facility is going to be audited, the auditor is supposed to reach out to, victim services programs and other types of community programs that might have information about relevant facility conditions. Some advocates tell us that they do hear from auditors. Some advocates tell us they've been providing services to incarcerated people for years and have never heard from an auditor. So just to mention that the point there is for you to be able to share, obviously not privileged information, confidential information, but relevant facility conditions. And so that goes back to those kind of bigger picture questions that we're getting at. So for example, if you have reason to believe based on your interactions with folks at the facility that this is a facility that engages in a pattern of abusive strip searches or abusive pat searches, or doesn't allow people to access the hotline, or whatever that is, right, automatically throws people into what is essentially solitary confinement if they make a report of sexual abuse. Those are the types of things that you can share. And they may not be as dramatic as that, but whatever those conditions are, those concerns are that you want to share, that would be great. You should be able to tell the auditor about the nature of your partnership, because unfortunately there have been facilities who have fibbed a bit and have said, oh yeah, we have a partnership with such and such facility, and come to find out, there is no such partnership, or there is no MOU. And it's something where essentially the program has been kind of voluntold by the facility, like, hey, you need to start providing services. And maybe in the absence of kind of realizing that was not something that they were required to do, and that they should have been treated in a much more kind of collaborative way, maybe the program has gone ahead and done that. So you should let the auditor know whatever the nature of that partnership is. And then any concerns that you have, as I just said, around the facility's lack of good faith. If we can go to the next slide, because we just have a few minutes left. I want to mention some changes that are coming to the audit process that I think are very exciting. And this is because the Department of Justice has recognized some of the very deep concerns with the auditing process, and with the fact that, for example, a lot of advocacy programs never hear when an audit is going to take place. So they want to put more of the power into the hands of the stakeholders and not just leave it up to the auditors to reach out and let people know. So as of sometime later, probably like the end of the month, we should hope, there is going to be information that is going to be provided on the PREA Resource Center website, most likely. If you Google PREA Resource Center, so PREA as in Prison Rape Elimination Act Resource Center, that is where the information is supposed to be. It's supposed to let you know in some sort of a database about upcoming, ongoing, and completed audits, and you'll be able to search by facility, who the assigned auditor is for that particular audit that might be, upcoming, for example. What are the audit dates of when that auditor is supposed to be on site? The copy of the final audit report should be posted there, and a way to contact that auditor directly so that you are not necessarily waiting and hoping to be contacted, but you can reach out and share the information that should also then make it into that final audit report. Other questions, or I don't know, Nisa, if you had also wanted to share some around the audit.
Yeah, just really quick, because I know we had talked about like our experience like with audits and all that. And I don't know if anybody else has experienced this also, where you'll get a call from someone. We usually get them at our crisis hotline, and we get the question of, if I was an inmate at this facility, would you help me if I, had experienced like sexual abuse? And sometimes they will or won't give their name, and they try to keep it as brief as possible, which is not great for, facilitating a conversation about, our partnerships with the facilities. We need to know like where they're calling from. And so all of the staff are trained now to ask these questions before answering that question of like, because we're always going to say yes, we're going to try to help people as much as possible, like regardless of where they're calling from. But we want to, before we say yes, we want to know like, okay, what facility are you calling from? Can I have your name? You're the auditor, like the pertinent information that we need to know. Because otherwise, if you just say yes, they're just gonna be like, okay, thank you, and hang up. And it's like, you have nothing now. You don't know where you're calling back to or to try to find out. But I don't know, I was wondering if anybody else had experienced that too. And we also had the experience as well a couple of years ago where a facility had put us down as their rape crisis like support center. And it was like, we have had no communication with that facility. We've never spoken to anyone from there. They've never reached out to us to see about creating a partnership with an MOU. And, that's why it's also really important to know, what facility is this auditor calling from, and all of that, because before we say, yes, that we will help someone, we want to know, do we have a partnership with them? And so we'll say, yes, we will help that survivor. And, we do have a partnership with this facility, or, we would try to help this survivor, but we don't have an MOU with them. So we can't guarantee that our conversation over the hotline is going to be private and confidential. I can't promise the survivor, you know, what we would normally be able to assure them with an MOU in place. And sometimes they're kind of like, oh, okay, thank you. And then, you know, sometimes they want to follow up and have a conversation more. But it was just kind of a learning thing for us and how to navigate that. So I'm really excited about these changes about audits. And hopefully that kind of limits that from continuing to happen.
Yeah, and please don't ever agree to be an outside reporting entity for a corrections facility. That is something that the DOJ has come out and said that it's basically not appropriate because of the confidentiality obligations and the role of advocates. So I know we're like 2 minutes before the close, so I guess I want to turn it over to Maddie. And then also thank you, Haley, because you've just said I have taken notes. We'll be discussing this information you all provided to make changes on our end. That's fantastic. And definitely encourage you, Haley, to reach out to any of us if we can be helpful.